His book calls 3D printing a disruptive technology, and he believes 3D printers are going to change the world. Please help me welcome author, lawyer, and respected top thinker in the field of 3D printing. Here's John Hornick. John, nice to see you.
Well, thanks for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
John, first of all, I'd like to ask you about a little bit about what you do and how you've come to become somebody so well respected in the field of 3D printing.
Well, I'm an intellectual property attorney. That's patents, trademarks, copyrights, and trade secrets. And I'm in a big firm called Finnegan. We're one of the largest IP firms in the world. We have about 350 attorneys. And several years ago, someone sent me a video of a machine printing out a wrench. And at first I thought it was a joke. But I thought, well, if this is real, this is important. I sent it on to some friends. One of the guys I sent it to was the chief architect at Johns Hopkins Hospital. And he wrote back and he said, this isn't a joke. We have doctors here who are trying to do this with human organs. And it's going to take a while, but, eventually it'll happen. So this is real. So I thought, well, this really is important. And I started looking into whether my firm had done any work in this area. It turned out we had, and it was called rapid prototyping up until fairly recently. So we'd done a lot of work in that area. I decided to formalize our practice, and I started looking into this, and I read all these articles that said that 3D printing creates a lot of IP issues, intellectual property issues, but it never said what they were. So I thought, well, I'm going to figure out what they are, and I started digging into it deeply, and the more I got into it, the more interested I was, and my interest went way beyond the law, and I eventually realized that I had enough material for a book, so I wrote this book, 3D Printing Will Rock the World, which is partly about the law. One chapter is, but the other 9 chapters are all about the technology and how it might affect jobs and kids learning the technology and that sort of thing.
Very cool. So it started with a video being shared with
Yes.
John Hornick. And that makes me think, John, about how that particular industry, on-demand video, has revolutionized the way that we watch television, the way that we sit down for our entertainment. And when that transition was happening, so thinking about the YouTubes and the defunct Blip.tv and several other companies, Vimeo is another one that comes to mind. How those kinds of technologies and really even stepping into things like Netflix, how those have disrupted the terrestrial, the traditional style television broadcasters. And they kind of saw it as a fad when it first started happening, and they were ill prepared for it. So now here we are, so many years later, and they're scrambling to provide on-demand services to their subscribers, and they're losing subscribers like crazy because they're just not ready for that on-demand era of video distribution. So similarly, I think we're kind of on the threshold here of 3D printing, and reading your book, realizing that we really are at that point where there are a lot of industries that are like the television broadcasters of days gone by. They're not ready. They're not expecting this to be more than just a fad. Are there particular industries that you can think of, John, that are really going to be caught by surprise and have to catch up?
Well, IBM did a study in 2013, and they studied all kinds of industries, and I talk about this in my book. And what they said, and I agree with this, is that any company that relies on selling parts, that company's at risk. Because right now they figure, well, they make the part. Maybe there's a competitor or two that makes the part. But what if their customers could make the part? And so really any kind of a company that makes and sells replacement parts or spare parts, they're at risk. And also any kind of consumer products company.
So why do you think that 3D printing technology is going to reshape industry and really, as you say in your book, it's going to rock the world? Why do you think that?
There are a lot of different reasons. One reason, and maybe one of the main ones, is that traditionally when things were made, you had a factory full of machines, and they all had to have people to operate them. And labor is not cheap in this country and in a lot of other countries now. And so that type of manufacturing tends to go to places where labor is cheap, and you have mass production in far-off lands. But a 3D printer has the ability to eliminate a lot of those machines that you needed traditionally. So instead of having maybe 10 or 12 machines to make a particular part. You have one machine, and you can build that part in one build, in one machine. It's operated by one person, or maybe you have a person that operates a whole room full of 3D printers. So you're eliminating a lot of labor from the equation. And when you do that, it allows you to bring manufacturing back to places where you have high labor costs, like the United States and the UK and Australia and even Japan today.
So are we talking about a loss of jobs here, John?
Well, I always like to make an analogy to the horse. The answer to your question is yes. Some jobs will be lost, new jobs will be created. And the analogy that I make is to the horse. When the horse was the main form of transportation in the world, there were all kinds of horse-related jobs. People who took care of the horses and fed them and who put shoes on them and who made saddles and wagons and wagon wheels. And when the automobile came along, all of those jobs were lost. But think of all the jobs and businesses and types of business models that were created by the automobile that no one could have even conceived of when we're riding around on horses. Well, the same thing's going to happen with 3D printing. It will shake up some businesses. It might destroy some businesses. It might destroy some existing business models. Some people might lose their jobs. But it will create all kinds of new jobs and new businesses.
Okay, so where are we going to see the first real shift? Like, which field is going to get hit first in this 3D printing era?
Well, I think where we'll see it first is with companies that make and sell parts. And we have some big industrial manufacturing companies as clients who are worried about this. They're worried that their parts for their machinery will be, say, they'll be 3D scanned. Either in this country or in another country, maybe by their customer or maybe by some third party, and that those scans will then be turned into digital blueprints. Some people call them digital models or 3D models. I call them digital blueprints. So they'll be turned into digital blueprints, and then somebody will print out that part for the customer. Maybe the customer will print it out himself. And so then rather than buying those parts from the manufacturer, the customers are now making the parts. And an example I give is of a company that I know of that uses turbine blades for power generation. And they have to replace these blades every few years, and when they do that, it's really expensive. But recently they started using a type of 3D printing, not to make new blades, but to repair the blades that they had.
Okay.
And so now they are not buying blades anymore. And now this is really great for the company that needs the blades, but it's really terrible for the company that sells the blades. So you see the customers essentially become the manufacturer, and that can happen with any kind of a company that sells parts.
Okay, so how is this going to have an impact on the general consumer?
Well, the general consumer right now, there are two sides to this industry. There's an industrial side and there is a consumer side. And what I was talking about before was mostly kind of on the industrial side in a situation where an industrial machine manufacturing company sells a machine and then their customer needs new parts. They make the new parts or they have them made for them. From a consumer perspective, the same thing can happen in a couple of different ways. One way is that there will be companies that will be able to make parts for you. Maybe that company is down the block from you, or maybe it's on the internet. And you tell them what part you need. Maybe you scan a part that you have and you send them the digital blueprint yourself, or you send them the scan, they turn it into a digital blueprint, they print it for you. Or the other way it can happen is you may eventually have a 3D printer in your own home, or you may have one in what I call a friends network. One of your friends might have one that can do what you need it to do. And you have that part printed out in your own home or in your friend's home. So those are the two basic ways that it can affect consumers. Now, it's not really happening too much on the consumer side right now. It's starting to. But it's just a matter of time.
So that kind of opens up a whole new industry of companies that can manufacture these parts on behalf of the consumer. To me, 3D printing still seems really like an expensive process. What's the driving factor? What is it that's really the benefit that's going to push 3D printing itself as a process to change the world, as you say?
Well, right now, its real benefits are that you can make really complex parts without them costing any more on a per part basis. Traditionally, to make something complex, the more complex it is, the more it would cost to make it. Also, it doesn't cost any more to make a batch of one or to make a one-of-a-kind part than to make a million of them. And that's also different from traditionally, because to make one of a kind, that always cost more in the past. And also, you can make customized parts. So you can make something customized for a particular customer, and customization used to always cost more too. Well, none of that costs more on a per part basis with 3D printing. So if you're dealing with a part that is complex, or you only need a one, or you only need a few, for example, in aerospace, where you might not need a million of a part, you might only need 1,000 of a part, or if it's something that's customized, that's the real strengths right now. Now, in the longer term, as the machines get faster, and as the prices of the machines come down, and as they're more and more capable of making complex things with hybrid materials, so it's simpler. You don't need 20 or 30 materials to make something. You can make it out of one or two materials. As those things happen over time, then you'll be able to make the benefits will spread into other types of products and other types of parts, because you won't be limited by some of the limitations the machines have now, like speed or having to use a lot of different materials.
The technology is going to improve by a long shot, for sure. So we live in a world right now that is mass manufacturing a lot of waste because companies have to manufacture X number of units. If you build a car, you've got to have pieces of that car on standby for every auto shop to order those parts. So will we get to a point where cost per unit is going to go down enough that we're going to see a shift from mass manufacturing?
Well, I think that we will. And then when you say, will we get to the point, the future is a really long time. And so, when you ask some people in the industry if what you said, will that happen, they'll say, well, not anytime soon. But when you drill down on what they mean by that, what they usually mean by that is, well, not within the next 10 years or not within the next 20 years. But the future is a lot longer than that. So, yeah, eventually we'll get to the point where it's practical to be making parts with 3D printers, virtually any kind of a part. We'll probably have more and more customization as time goes on. So this whole concept of needing to have mass-produced parts, that may not go away completely, but that may change a lot, so that a lot of the things we're used to having mass-produced now, in the future, we may not mass-produce them anymore. We may mass-customize them instead.
Right. Okay. A wise man once said, "We will only ever need 640K memory in our computers." This is what happens when we try to predict the future. Right?
That's right.
Speaking of, you mentioned that we're going to see a shift to less components, less materials being used for the building process. Jeff, you had an interesting point before the show.
Yeah. So one of the things with 3D printing is can you incorporate multiple elements into it? For instance, could you print a circuit board where you've got the plastics and the metal and all that kind of stuff? Is that a possibility that's coming, or is it a possibility now?
Well, you can do it now. It's fairly primitive. University of Texas at UTEP, so it's University of Texas at El Paso. They have a lab there where they've done some work where they've 3D printed the structure of a part along with conductive traces in it. So in other words, the conductive parts of it, they print them in there. There's a startup company called Voxel 8 that they 3D printed a drone where they printed the structure of the drone, and then they also printed the wiring that goes inside of it, and then it flew out of the printer. But they placed the motor in there. It didn't print the motor. Okay, so but that in time, everyone I think believes that eventually you'll be able to print all of that. So right now, that what you just described, that's kind of in its early stages, but there are people who are experimenting with that.
Wow.
Sounds amazing. John, as an IP lawyer, I understand that there are many patents surrounding 3D printing technology, and that's even been a hindrance to some degree to manufacturers trying to push the technology. They can't release things that they've been developing if they have patents that are surrounding them. Are we going to see a shift in that? How is the technology going to progress if basically patent trolls, if you will, are maintaining these patents?
Well, patents haven't really gotten in the way of the development of this industry yet. And part of the reason for that is that I think the market capitalizations for most of the companies that are in this industry, that the homegrown companies, in other words, the companies that started out making 3D printers, they never made anything else. They weren't big manufacturing companies that got into this area. They started out making 3D printers. Their market caps really aren't big enough to justify a lot of patent litigation. So even if their patents are being infringed, for the most part, they're leaving each other alone. There really haven't been any what you call patent trolls in this space yet. Patent trolls, for people who don't know, they're also called non-practicing entities. They're people who own patents, but they don't make anything. They just own the patents, and then they enforce them against people who are making things. And, one man's patent troll is another man's entrepreneur, so you can't necessarily judge them in one way or the other. But so far, patents aren't really getting in the way. Companies are getting patents. They're building patent portfolios. Some of them are licensing that technology to others. But I think that eventually there will be a lot more patent litigation in the 3D printing space, not just in companies who make printers and make materials, but also in companies that use the technology, which could be any company making any kind of technology. Now, I personally don't, even though I'm a
Well, it looks like John is hung up there. John, if you're still with us, looks like you're frozen up, so we'll just take a brief moment. And if John is still with us, we're going to come right back. John is the author of 3D Printing Will Rock the World. And this is John Hornick that we're speaking with. We're going to try to reestablish a connection here. You can check out this book. It is becoming fast the de facto encyclopedia, if you will, with regards to the future of 3D printing. You can pick that up through our
I don't know what
link.
happened there.
Well, hello, John.
Sorry.
We were just talking about your book. We lost connection there, but that's okay. You can pick it up on Amazon through our partner links. You can find those on our website, category5.tv. If you want to get straight to the book, find out more about it, order your own copy, go to cat5.tv/rocktheworld. I'm sorry that you got cut off there, John. I'll let you carry on where you were.
Yeah, I don't know exactly where. What was we were in the middle of it?
We were talking about patent trolls in specific.
Oh, what I was starting to say actually is that I would like to see, ideally, something that's called a patent pool. And patent pools are something that most people aren't familiar with, but you've probably heard of RCA. Well, RCA started out as a patent pool. It was radio patents that were being obtained by a lot of different owners. And in the early days of radio, somebody said, "Hey, let's not let these patents get in the way of the development of technology. Let's put them all into what's called a pool, and everyone can have a license to them. And there are ways that you share royalties over that. And ideally, I'd like to see that in this space. Now, I've raised it a few times, and nobody really seems to like the idea because investors always want to see patents, and they want to see that a patent can be used to stop competitors. But I think that in this particular space, at its point of development, it would be better off with something like a patent pool than with a lot of patent litigation.
Gotcha.
Okay.
We're speaking with John Hornick, and John, we have our chat room live joining us tonight, and some questions coming in for you.
Yeah, so one of the questions was regarding firmware blocking. So, and whether this is something that will come into play, or it might even be in play now with 3D printing. Like there's some photocopiers that won't copy, say, banknotes. Is that something that's being incorporated into 3D printing technology?
Almost like a DRM technology for proprietary parts,
right,
if you will.
Well, my feeling is that DRM, which is digital rights management, that it doesn't work. It creates what there's a guy in the industry named Hod Lipson. He's a professor at Columbia University who wrote a book on this topic too, and he calls DRM a digital arms race, which the person who's developing the DRM is bound to lose. And I agree with that. But people do talk about trying to program a machine so it can't print out certain things, like maybe a gun part. But I think that's fundamentally impossible to do, especially since a lot of the technology that's in this space is open. It's open source.
Sure.
It's not locked. And also another important thing is that 3D printing gives us the ability to make things that don't look anything like the things we're used to them, or the way we're used to them looking. So you take a gun, for example. Well, guns don't have to look like guns. And when you have a 3D printer, you can really make it look like anything.
All right, this
and
is starting to get
scary. The same is true
scary.
of any other kind of a part. You know, right now parts look the way they do because of the way they have to be made based upon existing manufacturing methods.
Right.
But we don't have those limitations with 3D printing, so you can make a part or product look very different from what we're used to. And I've got some great examples of that in the book, photos of things in the book that are very different looking than what we're used to.
Indeed. Now, we don't have to use 3D printing to create weapons that look like bananas. That's for sure.
But we could.
But thinking about, like, say, Lego, right? Like, there's a patented product that potentially could be manufactured at home by a 3D printing. And so that's probably not going to... Do you think that that's ever going to be a problem from a DRM standpoint?
Well, you know, what's interesting about Lego, a lot of people think that Lego is protected by a lot of intellectual property. I'm not really sure that it is because if you want to talk about patents, Lego bricks, the basic Lego brick, has been around for a long time, and patents last right now. They last for 20 years from the filing date. Copyright is not going to cover a Lego brick. And there may be some proprietary methods in how they make them, and that's probably protectable. Maybe still is protectable, even though Lego bricks have been around for a long time. But what they say is that they say it's really hard to make a Lego brick. They say it's really hard to make a Lego brick that's perfect, you know, that where they'll fit together perfectly the way you want them to. I personally find that a little bit hard to believe, but even if it's true, even if it's accurate, I don't think it will be true for long. And eventually, it will be easy to reproduce something like. And right now, you can make Lego bricks. I don't know if they're as accurate as Lego would want them to be, but they're probably functional. And in time, you'll probably be able to make a perfect Lego brick.
Sure.
Wow.
Cool.
So, speaking of making something like a Lego brick, like one of the things that I loved about your book is I'm just flipping through all the unique and wonderful things that are being made in through 3D printing. What are some of the really cool items that in your research you came across? You're like, man, this is amazing.
Well, you know, my favorites are in the section, in the chapter that's about design. And it's that chapter, I believe, is called Merging Science and Nature. And the idea there is that, you know, traditionally, everything that humans make, it looks like a human made it. But 3D printing gives you the ability to make things that look more like Mother Nature made them, more like Mother Nature's designs, things that look like they were grown rather than built. Mm-hmm. And I have some examples of that in the book. One example is a bridge strut. Now, when you think of a bridge, you think of something that's very linear and has hard corners. But the strut that I have in the book, that's very organic. It only has material where you need it. Doesn't have any material where you don't need it. It looks like something you might see in a science fiction movie of the future, a part that comes out of a spacecraft. It's very looks like I said before, looks like it was grown rather than it was built. And that, I think, is a fascinating benefit of 3D printing, is that you start to get designs that are very different from the designs that we're used to. And I've said this several times now, but if you take, for example, a smartphone. Right now, smartphones, they look like they do, partly because Steve Jobs said this is the way it's got to look, but partly because we have limitations on how they can be made. And a friend of mine in the industry says, well, we'll never be able to 3D print a smartphone in the home because you'd have to have 30 materials or 50 materials. You'd have to have metal. You'd have to be able to melt the metal. That would cause a lot of heat. It would be dangerous. And I said, no. If we're ever able to make 3D print a smartphone in the home, it won't look anything like this. And it won't be made of 50 materials. It'll be made of 2 materials or 3 materials.
Interesting.
And it'll look very different. It'll feel very different. It just needs to do what a smartphone does.
Right.
So in the book, I've got some examples. The one is there's a chair in there, a very organic looking chair. There is a violin that's kind of a hauntingly beautiful instrument called the Ondemand violin that was 3D printed, very different design than anything you'd ever think of as being a violin. And there's some other examples out there. One, I couldn't actually get permission to use the photo in the book. I really wanted to, but I just the owner of the photo couldn't give me permission. But it's of what I call a second skin running shoe, and it looks like it's something that's biological, not something that was actually made by a machine. and it's made of something called protocells, and they inflate when you run to provide cushioning, and they deflate when you're not running.
No
and
way.
you store them in a vat of protocells overnight. So the types of things we'll be able to make 3D print, or that was bioprinted, they will be very different, and so we'll see very different designs.
So we're talking about not just a shift in the manufacturing process, but also the paradigm of the product itself.
Exactly.
And when we talk about organics, so we're talking about basing 3D printed technology on technology that has been created by mankind. Well, what about organic limbs and being able to replace organic body parts? How far off are we from that?
Well, there's 3D printing, and then there's bioprinting, and bioprinting is also a type of 3D print.
Looks like we may have lost John again. It's okay. We're going to have him back in just a moment's time. We know that's the case. We are speaking with John Hornick. He's the author of 3D Printing Will Rock the World. As I think about the progression of technology, and here we are, companies invested in billions of dollars worth of satellites, and here we've got a computer connected over a cell phone network to bring in a communication from an author down in the United States, and here we are in Canada. So the technology has progressed in that way as well. We're going to reestablish that connection in just a moment's time. This is Category 5 Technology TV, and you'll find our website at www.category5.tv.
Hello. Sorry, I don't know what happened there again.
You know what? We're gonna. It's Skype. We can always just we can say it was Microsoft. Microsoft did it. Sorry, we were just starting to talk about organic limbs and things like that. So if you could share about that.
Sure. Well, what I was getting at is there's a kind of a side or a branch to 3D printing called bioprinting, and there are researchers, universities, and companies out there that are trying to bioprint human organs. Now, right now, they're getting started. They're making human tissue, for example, that can be used for drug testing or cosmetics testing. But the goals are to make what I call the big five: the liver, the kidney, the heart, the eye. And what did I leave out? Liver, the kidney, the heart, the eye. Well, anyway, I'm leaving something out. But the goal is to be able to print those all eventually, and I think eventually they will. But I was at a conference not too long ago where a guy named Gabor Forjaks, who was with the company, founder of a company called Organovo, was saying that by the time that we can 3D print something like a human heart, we may not want to make a human heart. In other words, the human heart isn't perfect for people who are living as long as we are now. So maybe by the time we can make a human heart, maybe we can improve it. Maybe what we'll wind up with, and this wasn't my idea, this was his idea. Maybe what we'll wind up with is a heart that's a combination of biological and mechanical. And so then if you carry that idea a little farther, you don't necessarily have to limit it to things you're making for the human body. You could have all kinds of products that are partly mechanical and partly biological. Now, this is a ways down the road, but I don't think it's that far down the road. It's maybe 20 to 30 years down the road.
You think it's that close, eh?
Wow. Well, I know that university, a guy named Stuart Williams, he's a doctor at the University of Louisville. He plans to 3D print a human heart by the year 2023. I believe he'll do it.
Unreal.
Now, but what if he's off by 10 years? That's still not very far out.
It's still an achievement, but dude, you said it would take X number of years. Yeah,
exactly.
Speaking of the timeline, you mentioned at the end of your book, chapter 10, that the kids who are going to really drive this technology. How do the kids play into this and the whole shift toward 3D printing? And what kind of timeline are we going to see? Like with our kids growing up, are our kids going to be the ones that help shape this technology?
Well, some people say that we will never have 3D printers in every home. I have a lot of reasons for thinking that we will, and one of the reasons that I have for believing that there will be a 3D printer in every home is kids. Kids are going to demand them. Right now, we're starting to see more and more 3D printers in the classroom. So the kids will say, well, I need one of those, or maybe soon they'll have homework that uses a 3D printer. And they're being used not just to teach how to use 3D printers. they're being used to teach STEAM, science, technology, engineering, art, and math education, STEAM education. So you can use a 3D printer, for example, to print out a gear and show how gears work together. You can use a 3D printer to print out a battlefield if you're teaching history. You can use one to print out an ancient building, a pyramid, or an ancient Roman building. And there's a professor whose name escapes me at the moment, but who's using 3D printing to teach math. And so there's a type of math theory called knot theory, where you're talking about knots that would be tied with rope, but these are knots that have no ends to the rope. And there's a mathematical concepts involved in this, and she's printing out these knots so that the students can study them. There's a teacher in California I know of who's teaching a science class about insects to kids, and he has them design their own insect and come up with the way that it lives, and then print it out, and then they do stop-action videos of them, and they post those on YouTube. And so kids are learning the technology now, not just learning how to use the technology itself, but learning all types of topics like science and math. They're learning with the machines. So what's going to happen is the kids are going to grow up with the technology, and the technology is going to grow up with the kids. They're going to improve the technology as it goes along, and it's going to teach them as it goes along. So it's going to be like an iterative process.
I've got to apply the whole idea of my kids to, it's like when I was your age, and I'm at that point now, John. When I was a kid, video cameras were astonishingly expensive. Yeah. So how did it start for me? It started with the school. The school had video cameras. Yep. So I couldn't have one at home. It was way too expensive for a consumer to have one at home. And the technology was really very basic back then.
And now here you are with a tech show.
And now I'm surrounded by cameras in a television studio. So my kids could potentially be learning, if we can start to see these 3D printers really establishing themselves in the education system, then I can understand your chapter 10 points where, the kids are really, they're going to grow up with this technology and it becomes part of their life. Mm-hmm. And that's going to push and revolutionize. You can get 3D Printing Will Rock the World on Amazon. Please do use our affiliate links. You can find those on our website, category5.tv, and you just follow the partner links. Or if you want to go straight to it, go to cat5.tv/rock the world. Tonight we've been speaking with the author of the book. We're speaking with John Hornick. John, it was such a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, and we're looking forward to things to come.
Well, it was my pleasure, too, and thanks for having me. Thanks very much.
A pleasure. Take care.
Thanks.
You too. Take care. Bye-bye.
This is Category 5 Technology TV. Welcome to the show. Now, I've got one of these to give away. Woo-hoo. So all you got to do is email me contest@category5.tv. When you email me, make sure you include your registered username at www.category5.tv. We're going to send that to you if you win. The draw will be held next Tuesday night, so you've got a chance to win, even if you're watching this on demand. That's called 3D Printing Will Rock the World by John Hornick.
That book rocked my world. I kept looking at it, I'm like, this is so neat.
It's really interesting, and it's almost, I dare say, prophetic, because it feels like you're reading a book where, this guy obviously knows what he's talking about, John Hornick, and has done all the research and knows a lot of people in the field, and is able to make predictions that are very, very likely to come true.
And what I love is that, like, we just had this great interview with him. He's a lawyer. He's not a 3D printing tech guy.
Sure.
But he's like, hey, is there anything we could do with this with our law firm? Looks into it. And this is his research. I mean, absolutely phenomenal stuff. And he's one of the world think tanks, that everybody goes to now for 3D printing. So neat.
Check out the book, cat5.tv/rock the world.